Hi there, this is Sean, the Honest Book Reviewer, with another book review. In this video we're discussing Charnel House, written by Graeme Masterton. It's a horror novel written in the 70s, and it was an Edgar Award finalist. This is a really interesting book. It starts off as a classic possessed house book, but then morphs into something totally different. And I found it really gripping and really enthralling and engaging. And I like the characters, and I like the whole concept of this book. I was really hooked from the beginning. From that very first scene, I was hooked. And even that first scene felt different than a horror novel. So the first scene even felt like a detective story. So Graeme Masterton has managed to create a story that kind of encaptures all different types of stories, I think, into one. And it's a really special book. Even though it's in the 70s, it was published in the 70s, I think it still holds its own today. We start off with John Hyatt. He works for the sanitation department. He's in his office one day, and in walks Seymour Wallace. Seymour's got a problem. He thinks his house is breathing. He can hear breathing every day in his house. And he's sure it's not pipes. He's sure it's not air flow from somewhere. He thinks the house is breathing, and it sounds like human breathing. John, of course, is a bit skeptical. And what's this guy coming in talking about a breathing house for? He thinks that Seymour's crazy. They talk a bit, but then John agrees to go check it out that day. And John even ropes in one of his colleagues to go with him. And this colleague is quite interested because he believes in hauntings and ghosts, and he's really keen to see what's going on with this breathing house. So already this hooked me into the story. One, the start of the book felt like those old-time detective stories, when the detective is sitting in his office and somebody walks in with a case. I got that impression from the story, and that intrigued me a lot. And that made me think of John Hyatt as a detective as well in this story. Also, the whole concept of the possessed house. I do love a possessed house story, and that hooked me into this immediately. So they're all at Seymour's house, at Charnel House, and they can all hear the breathing, all of them. They're trying to work out what it could be. Could it be airflow from somewhere? What could be making this breathing noise? Pipes? They're not really sure. And then they get an idea. They start to confront the breathing, and they challenge the breathing, and they're challenging the breathing to present themselves in more detail, tell them who it is. Is it a spirit? Suddenly there's a surge of power, and it knocks John's colleague back off his chair onto the floor, and he's unconscious. And that person is taken to hospital, and he ends up being in a coma of sorts as well. And he has breathing attacks, and the doctors think he's asthmatic, but he's not. But he keeps having these breathing attacks at regular times, and they're about an hour and a half, 2 hours apart. And when he has these attacks, it sounds like the breathing from the house. And that's very interesting as well. And when John hears that, he's wondering what's going on. Could that breathing effect from the house, could that now be in his friend and his colleague? Has his colleague been possessed by something? They end up going back to the house to investigate more. And this time, John brings other people with him. One is a friend, and she works and owns some sort of occult store. It's a bookstore and sells other things as well. And also another colleague who's an engineer. And this engineer is going to look at the structure of the house and see if he can work out what's causing the breathing. But when they get there, there's no breathing this time. And his friend, the colleague, the engineer, is looking in chimneys because he thinks it could be air coming down the chimney. But when he looks in the chimneys, he hears a thumping. And it's a regular thumping noise, and it has a rhythm to it. And it keeps going. And it keeps going, this thumping noise. So John's friend Jane, and I like the fact that we got John and Jane, and they did date very briefly in the history before this book. And there's quite a bit of a joke in there that Jane says, lucky that John's name isn't Doe. So I found that quite funny. So in this book, there's a little bit of humour going on as well. So Jane investigates this through her bookstore, and through books she's reading, she thinks she's narrowed it down to some sort of first American demon, some myth about a demon that possesses people or was alive at some stage. And this is where the story goes into different territory. So first we had the haunting, the house haunting, maybe possession. Then we had possibility of people possessed. And now we've got possibility of being linked to a first American demon or demonic spirit or some sort of evil spirit. And so the story is kind of shifting and merging as it goes along. But it's so fascinating and so gripping that you can't help but be swept along with the story. And I was just fully into this story. I was fully immersed into it, and I found everything about it just so gripping and so thrilling. John Hyatt, I enjoyed this character. I thought he was a really good character. I enjoyed seeing his journey from skeptic to believer. That was really interesting to see. And I enjoyed his heroics, even though some are over the top. I did enjoy them in the story. They seemed to fit. I thought he was a good mix in his characterization. He had some humour. He was a bit rough around the edges as well in his character. He just felt very real and very lifelike. I think a very good character in this story. George Thousand Names is the first American mystic that they get to help them fight this evil. He was a well-written character for the most part. I love that he's written as being wise, and he's written as being very calming as well. And he has a lot of knowledge about the stories, as you'd expect, because he's a first American mystic, and he's one of the leaders in that area. But later on, it changes a bit, and he's written as being a bit power hungry, a bit hungry for glory. And I found that a bit inconsistent with the character when it first started. Maybe it was written as a bit of a twist with the character, I'm not sure. But I didn't think it gelled that well, and it made me think a bit less about the character, and I found it very confusing. I would have preferred that his character not switch like that, because I think the character worked best when he was working for good and not for himself. Jane, who owns the bookstore and was the past love interest for the main character John, I did like her character. She was strong, clever, independent, had a lot of strength with her as well. She got stuck into things, but the thing that seems strange is that she owns this occult bookstore, this occult store, and she wasn't really knowledgeable about things. She had to research a lot and then didn't know as much as I thought she would. And I wonder if that's a sign of the times, though. This book written in the 70s, I wonder if the author or the times didn't think the female character could be the one that knows everything, the one that's the hero. And that went through my mind as well when I read this book, but I did think Jane was a great character in this story. I really enjoyed this read, and it makes me want to read Graeme Masterton, all his horror novels. I want to go through them all and read them all, because I just found this book really gripping, really entertaining as well, and very chilling. And that whole morphing of the storyline, first being about a haunted house, a possessed house, then about people being possessed, then about this great evil that got to stop. I just found that really interesting and really engaging, and just developed the story and made it really big and really powerful. I really enjoyed this book a lot. I rate it a 4 out of 5. It's not perfect, but it's a really great story, and I can see why it was nominated for the Edgar Award when it was first published. It just has that feel to it that it was a really great horror novel for its time. On my channel, I review a lot of horror novels. If you don't want to miss out on those reviews, check out my channel and subscribe. Also, there's a horror playlist on my channel. It should be on your screen now.